This is a production of the World History Since 15th Century class at London Christian High 2021.
We are Samantha and Kaylin. Today we will be talking about the Philippines. This is not a place whose background we share, but we are hoping to use our research skills to share this lesser-known history and in an effort to foster community and understanding.
As we are covering a colonial experience, we would like to give a content warning to our listeners and say that we will be talking about slavery.
We are not a voice for the Filipinos. We are basing our information on archaeological and written historic evidence. Filipino oral traditions may differ, and we are not the authority on oral traditions, but fully respect the narrative and encourage you, the listener, to find out more. Also, please forgive us if our pronunciations are not correct, despite our efforts to learn proper pronunciations to honor this culture.
The Philippines is located in Southeast Asia and consists of many islands. In total, the country has 7,640 islands in the Pacific Ocean. 2,000 of these islands are uninhabited. There are three main islands: Luzon, which is the largest northern island, with Manila as the capital of the Philippines on this island. The second main island group is called Visayas. This group consists of 7 islands. The third and second largest island group in the Philippines is Mindanao. It is found in the southern part of the country. The Philippines was colonized 3 times by the Spanish, Americans, and the Japanese. The Spanish rule lasted from 1521 to 1898, and that's when the Americans took over from 1898 to 1946. And finally, Japanese occupied latest from 1941 to 1946. After this, the Philippines were able to gain independence and have had independence ever since.
The Philippines was the only country that was subjected to Western colonization before it could create a government system over territories and cultures. The first group of people that settled in the Philippines came through Asia's mainland, and they all had very little contact with each other.
The Baranggays had 3 classes: the Day-2 and his family, nobles and freeholders, and the dependents. The dependents were often sharecroppers, debt peons, and war captives. Debt peons and war captives were what the Spanish called slaves. This idea of slaves was accepted by the people, but one-person slavery did not last long, as people were released because of interclass marriage. Most people weren't slaves for more than 2 years.
There were 2 main religions, monotheism and polytheism. The islands had no religious hierarchy, but there were some serious differences in religion and structures within the islands. Islam was introduced in the late 15th century to many islands. New beliefs and practices came around along with new social and political institutions. By the mid-16th century, 2 sultans, or states, were established, and the Barangays and Datu in Manila were even very accepting of Islam.
When Spain invaded in 1521, they ended up in the Lapu-Lapu tribal region. When the Spanish invaded, they brought the idea of a walled city. It was built with inspiration from European buildings that replicated different parts of the islands. The Philippines was ruled by Spain for 350 years, with 300 years of it involving Filipino rebellion.
Spain saw the Philippines as a way to relocate riches into eastern India. Ferdinand Magellan was the first person to come from Spain to find the Philippine Islands. Magellan was a Portuguese explorer who sailed from Spain, went to claim the islands, and named them after King Philip II of Spain. Shortly after Magellan got there, he was killed by a poisoned arrow while attacking Lapu-Lapu's people.
Then in 1565, Spain was able to claim the Philippines. This is known as Spanish Philippines or Spanish colonial period. Until 1898, once Spain took over, they stopped Filipinos from all religious activities and forced them into Europe's Catholicism.
The Spanish religious orders granted Spanish warlords the right to control all Filipinos living within the boundaries of the Encomenderos, which was a Spanish labor group that got rid of the non-Christian groups. The warlords gave the Spanish the right to force Filipinos into labor for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. This was to allow the Filipinos to collect the tributes to the Spanish, when in reality, they didn't need to collect anything to give to the Spanish. The economic and political situations were also affected by the Spanish rule, but less than the religious section.
In 1571, Spain found what is now known as Manila and put it under control. By the end of the 16th century, Spain had located the lower mainland as well as coastal land and put them under control too. Spain continued to keep controlling by threatening anyone who took what they claimed as their land.
1756 was a rough year for those living in the Philippines. The 7 Years' War took place from 1756 to 1763. This war was fought between the British and the Spanish with the help of the natives. The British East India Company captured Manila and took over control. It was the 79th regime that took over control. Many families ended up being controlled by the Spanish warlords. When natives started getting mad about the capture, rebellions arose. Rebellions began in the north. The Spanish fought the Brits and the Moros in the south. The Moros were native Muslims that inhabited the Philippines before the Spanish came.
On October 6, 1762, British troops assembled to raid Manila. They broke through the walls surrounding, and the city made it to St. Jago's Church. Spanish troops assembled at St. Anthony's Church, opposite of St. Jago's, but were destroyed after a heavy fire. The British went straight into the city with these, and on October 31st, 1762, the HMS Argos and Panther, two British ships, along with St. Filipina, a Spanish ship, crossed paths with the British ships. The HMS Argos advanced toward the St. Filipina and bombed it for 2 hours until they surrendered.
The British East India Company governed Manila and the surrounding area, but the rest of the Philippines didn't acknowledge their rule. A resistance group headed by Simón de Andia Salazar trapped the British in Manila. The Treaty of Paris was signed by France, Britain, and Spain on February 10, 1763. At this time, the European countries had no idea that the British had captured Manila, but in April 1764, the Brits left Manila and the Spanish took over again.
The restoration of Spanish rule promoted new economic development of the islands and made them independent from subsides of New Spain. Most families could not afford to set aside anything into savings. Around the late 1700s, they became owners of the land and not holders of the land.
Galleon trade stopped in 1815 when the Royal Company of the Philippines took over, allowing direct and tariff-free trade between the islands and Spain. Cash crops were traded with Europe and Latin America. Profits stopped after Spain's Latin American colonies became independent in the 1810s to 1820s. In 1834, the Royal Company of the Philippines was abolished, which meant that free trade was accepted. Manila had very good harbors, so it became an open port for Asia, Europe, and Northern American traders. By 73, more ports opened for foreign commerce. Sugar and abaca, a type of leaf, was demanded for them to grow. When the Suez Canal was finished in 1869, the volume of exports to Europe expanded even further. In 1863, public education was available in the Philippines, but even then, the church controlled the curriculum.
In 1872, the uprising of Cadiz took place. José Burgos, Mario Gomez, and Jackino Zamora were all executed. They were all portrayed as martyrs of nationalism. José Rizal was arrested and exiled to Diplatan and was uninhabited island in 1896 for his beliefs and was later executed.
No one ceases to be a man. No one foretells his rights to civilization merely by being more or less uncultured. And since the Filipino is regarded as a fit citizen when he is asked to pay taxes or shed his blood to defend the fatherland, why must this fitness be denied him when the question arises of gaining him some right?
This quote is from José Rizal. It focuses on his beliefs and opinions. He stood up for the Filipinos that were not and could not stand up for themselves. He gave many people a voice. He is talking about how they have to pay taxes to Spain when they owe nothing. Even though the Filipinos did not like Spanish, they disliked the Americans even more, which led to the Spanish-American War.
The Spanish-American War happened on April 21, 1898 to July 17, 1898. The Spanish-American War was a conflict between the U.S. and Spain that ended Spanish colonization in the Philippines and started American colonization.
Americans decided to colonize the country for many reasons. William McKinley was the President of the United States at the time, and he quotes, "There was nothing left for us to do but take them all and educate the Filipinos and uplift and civilize the land and Christianize them by God's grace, do the very best we could by them." This quote shows how Americans wanted to do what was best for the Philippines and did not mean for it to break out into war. By saying they wanted to add more moral and religious perspective to the country, hid the fact they were going to colonize the country. The war started when Cubans started to struggle for independence in 1895. Cubans wanting independence impacted the U.S. investments and trades with the islands. Farms and land were all being destroyed. The Spanish were sending Filipinos to reconcentration areas, and people who remained at large were seen as a threat and an enemy to Spain. In the shelters Spain gave to Filipinos, Spain made no attempt to provide food, water, sanitation, medical care, or even give a proper shelter.
The Spanish fleet, the Aguinaldo, was demolished in Manila, forcing 12,000 troops to stay in Manila until the U.S. arrived. Americans and Filipino troops fought together until the Spanish were defeated. Then Filipinos and Americans fought.
Not until June 12, 1898, the Philippines declared their independence from Spain, after over 300 years. Shortly after the Philippines declared independence, the Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1989, and the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico were all claimed by the U.S. Only 2 days later, the Philippines revolted, and Emilio Aguinaldo became the president of the country. Aguinaldo's hopes for independence were dashed when the United States formally added the Philippines as part of its peace treaty with Spain. So even though Spain had left the Philippines, they never fully got away from Spain.
In March of 1901, Aguinaldo was captured and his troops were defeated. He called off his troops, but his troops defied orders and continued to fight for 2 more years. The Revolutionary Congress inaugurated Aguinaldo as president for the country 2 days later. In February of 99, hostilities broke out, and the next month, Aguinaldo and his troops were captured. He told them to surrender, but they ignored him, and fighting continued for another 4 years. Even though the Philippines gained independence, fighting still continued.
The Spanish-American War was very short-lived, and starting in April of 1989 and lasting until July of the same year. This war only lasted 4 months, but that was not the experience for any of the countries involved. Though Spain had immediate disastrous results, it was followed by new intellects materials in Spain. America now had professions of the Caribbeans all across the Pacific Ocean. Because of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Army grew to the second largest of the world fleets. During the war, America also lost many men in battle. As a result of this, America took over the countries and continued to colonize it. Political and economic changes were being made in Europe, which were starting to affect Spain and thus the Philippines. Families gained power and played an important role in Filipino politics. The central government in Manila retained a media caste, and the governor general was very like the country. They had developed a firm commitment to independence among a somewhat less privileged class, and more people weren't being looked down on as much. This shows how in the late 19th century, when Chinese immigration finally became official, this increased immigration and Chinese became prominent in Filipino social and economic life.
During World War II, Japan colonized the country from 1941 to 1945. We did not do a lot of research on this, as though it was out of the time period, but this means that the Philippines was colonized by 3 very different countries. They dealt with some major changes and had a lot of struggles. Dealing with 2 wars in a short time frame that changed the country a lot, for good and for bad, must have been very hard to live through.
This shows that there were a lot of changes that happened, but some things stayed the same for each colonization. This relates to some of our historical thinking concepts. One concept that we focused on was continuity and change. Many changes happened when the Spanish took over the Philippines. When the Spanish came, they brought Islam religion with them. If they had come later, the country might have been mainly Muslim instead. With each colonization that happened, the rulers and leaders changed as well.
This was a problem for the Filipinos as there were a lot of things changing in short periods of time. With each new ruler came new laws and standards that they had to follow. There wasn't a lot of continuity during this time as so much was going on. This caused a lot of confusion and problems. When they created their own government, they had already dealt with rules and different leaders, so they knew how different governments worked. This was a benefit for them. Each colonization was a kind of a trial run and error for them to see how they wanted to rule when they gained independence.
Cause and consequence is another historical thinking concept that we looked at. The way the Spanish took over the country led to war, famine, and a revolution of the Filipinos. Once the country finally got independence, they had influence of 3 different cultures: Spain, America, and later Japan. All affected how Philippines came to be. The Philippines had to be struggling to gain its independence from Spain, and so the United States decided to step in and intervene to defend the Philippines. This is one of the main reasons that the Spanish-American War happened. The Americans stepped in to help the Philippines to fight off the Spanish. This action led to war, which later was the cause of the Philippines gaining independence. In conclusion, getting the Philippines to where it is today took a lot of time and work. They went through 3 colonizations from the Spanish, Americans, and Japan. They went through some times of slavery and war, but managed to survive. After lots of fighting and standing up for themselves, Filipinos gained independence. Learning about this country has opened our point of view on colonization.
It has helped the Philippines create political, economic, and social development. By seeing how other countries work and run, helped the Philippines discover how they wanted to run their country. This has benefited the country and helped it succeed. The Philippines has been free from colonization for years and is thriving. With over 7,100 islands and 1/3 of them being inhabited, they have a population of over 100 million. Today, the Philippines is flourishing and successful.